All right, welcome to this explainer. Today we are unpacking one of the absolutely most chilling and frankly most baffling true crime puzzles in American history. We're talking about a literal masterclass in psychological terror, a case that completely paralyzed Northern California back in the late 1960s. We're talking, of course, about the Zodiac Killer. In this deep dive, we're going to piece together this 55-year-old unsolved mystery from the ground up. We'll be looking really closely at exactly how the killer operated, the totally bizarre ways he communicated with the public, and why, after all this time, the mastermind behind that iconic crosshair symbol remains completely unidentified. Let's dive right in.
Unsolved for over 55 years. I mean, it's just kind of staggering to think about, right? We live in an era today where DNA can literally solve a decades-old cold case overnight, where digital footprints track pretty much our every move. Yet despite thousands of suspects, massive FBI involvement, and the relentless evolution of modern forensics, the true identity of the Zodiac Killer has never actually been confirmed. It's a mystery that has actively defied resolution for over half a century. Every single piece of evidence we're going to look at has been heavily scrutinized for decades without ever yielding a definitive name. 37. Now that number, that represents the killer's own terrifying claim. Throughout all his communications, the Zodiac claimed to have murdered 37 people. However, the confirmed reality of the investigation is actually quite different. Law enforcement has only ever definitively linked him to 5 murders, along with 2 surviving victims. So there's this massive gap, right, between 5 confirmed deaths and 37 claimed victims. And this gap perfectly sets up the framework of the whole case. It's like a giant puzzle where the puzzle maker is actively distorting the truth, inflating his own myth, and just deliberately making it incredibly difficult for investigators to separate actual facts from his terrifying fiction.
All right, let's look at this next section. A trail of terror.
Okay, so let's dive into this timeline. It maps out a terrifying 10-month escalation of the 4 confirmed attacks. To really understand the psychological warfare he eventually waged, we first have to look at the visceral reality of his physical crimes. It all starts on a freezing December night in 1968 out at Lake Herman Road. 2 high schoolers on their very first date were tragically shot and killed. Then 6 months go by. In July 1969 at Blue Rock Springs, another couple is attacked in their car. One is killed, but one miraculously survives. Then the terror takes this really bizarre turn in September 1969 at Lake Berryessa. The killer actually approaches a picnicking college couple in broad daylight, but this time he's wearing a strange executioner-style hood, and he stabs them, leaving one dead. Finally, in October 1969 at Presidio Heights in San Francisco, the pattern just completely breaks. He shifts from targeting couples on remote lovers' lanes to shooting a 29-year-old cab driver point blank right in a residential neighborhood.
And the behavior at these crime scenes brilliantly illustrates just how bizarre this killer actually was. He escalated from what seemed like random violence to incredibly theatrical manipulation. I mean, get this. After the Blue Rock Springs attack, he actually called the police himself from a payphone just to take credit, offering up details that literally only the killer would know. At Lake Berryessa, like I mentioned, he wore that hooded costume featuring his soon-to-be famous crosshair symbol, and then he took a marker and physically wrote the dates of his previous murders right on the victim's car door. And then, after murdering the cab driver Paul Stein, he took a piece of Stein's bloody shirt and actually mailed it to a newspaper. So these aren't just murders, right? They are performances. He was leaving behind bizarre physical evidence that was specifically designed to shock and terrify the public.
Which brings us to the next phase of his crimes: psychological warfare. The physical crime scenes were undeniably horrifying, but the Zodiac's absolute most potent weapon, the thing that really cemented his dark legacy and just completely paralyzed the entire Bay Area, was his letters to the media. This is the Zodiac speaking. I mean, just imagine sitting down, opening your morning newspaper in 1969 and reading that chilling opening line. Starting in July of that year, he began mailing these letters to major Bay Area publications. We're talking the San Francisco Chronicle, the San Francisco Examiner, and the Vallejo Times-Herald. He demanded that his messages be printed right on the front pages, and he threatened to go on a massive killing spree if they weren't. And well, the newspapers complied. He would sign off with that infamous cross-circle symbol, turning his moniker into this inescapable, terrifying brand across all of Northern California.
And his motive? Just completely deranged. He wrote, "I like killing people because it is so much fun. I am collecting slaves for the afterlife." He wasn't driven by robbery. He wasn't driven by personal revenge. He claimed to be driven by this warped, supernatural delusion. And alongside these terrifying declarations, he started issuing massive public threats, including laying out detailed plans to bomb school buses. You can imagine the absolute pure panic this induced. Parents were absolutely terrified to send their kids to school. Police cars were literally tailing school buses just to keep them safe. He successfully held an entire metropolitan area hostage with nothing but a pen and a piece of paper, gaining the exact kind of sick infamy he was craving.
Let's move on to our next section, the cryptograms.
Now, looking at the 4 famous ciphers he sent, there is a really fascinating contrast here. You see, the Zodiac didn't just write letters in plain English. He actively embedded complex codes to mock authorities and invite the general public into his twisted little game. The first one, Z408, named because it has 408 symbols, was sent in parts back in 1969. The FBI and Navy intelligence both worked on it, but surprisingly enough, it was actually solved in just a matter of days by a local school teacher and his wife. It decoded to that horrifying message we just talked about killing being fun. But after that, the killer tightened his encryption. For decades, the absolute best codebreakers in the world couldn't crack the next one, the Z340. Then we have Z13 and Z32, 2 much shorter codes that remain completely unsolved to this very day. And the craziest part, the killer actually claimed his real name was hidden right inside these codes.
51 years. That is exactly how long it took to finally crack that Z340 cipher. In December 2020, an international team of amateur sleuths and professional codebreakers finally managed to decode those 340 symbols. It was a monumental achievement in cryptography, a real game changer for the case. The decoded message contained even more of his arrogant taunts, basically stating he wasn't afraid of the gas chamber, but crucially and frustratingly, it still didn't contain his name. Still, this 2020 breakthrough brilliantly illustrates that this isn't just some dusty history lesson. The investigation is incredibly active, and these puzzle pieces are literally still being worked on by dedicated people all over the globe today.
So this naturally leads us to a pretty massive question. Why wasn't he caught? I mean, with all this evidence, we have survivors who actually saw his face, physical crime scenes, all these letters, footprints, a bloody shirt for crying out loud. How did he manage to slip through the fingers of the FBI and local police who were pouring unprecedented resources into this massive manhunt?
Well, you really have to consider the severe limitations of the pre-DNA era. Back in the 1960s, detective work was heavily analog. They had to rely on composite sketches drawn from the memories of deeply traumatized survivors, partial fingerprints lifted off payphones, and handwriting analysis of his letters. And let's be honest, those are highly subjective tools compared to the airtight standards we have today. Now contrast that with the killer's tactics. The Zodiac employed a highly chaotic pattern-breaking methodology. He changed his weapons, switching from 9mm handguns to knives. He changed his locations completely randomly across different jurisdictions, which forced different unconnected police departments to try and coordinate their efforts. And his victim selection was totally random. When a killer has zero personal connection to the victims, and he constantly changes how and where he strikes, it makes it incredibly difficult, nearly impossible really, for 1960s law enforcement to establish any sort of usable profile.
Next up, let's take a look at suspects and dead ends.
Now, it's definitely not that the police didn't have leads. Over the years, they received hundreds of tips and investigated literally thousands of potential suspects. Several prime suspects have absolutely fascinated investigators over the decades. First, you have Arthur Lee Allen. He was a Vallejo teacher and actually the only person the police ever publicly named as a suspect. He owned similar weapons, he wore a Zodiac brand watch, and he matched some of the physical descriptions. However, it was all entirely circumstantial. Despite intense, relentless scrutiny, DNA and partial fingerprints have never conclusively linked him to the crimes. He passed away in 1992. Then we have Gary Francis Post, a name brought forward by an independent group called the Casebreakers back in 2021, though it's important to note law enforcement hasn't validated this claim. There are also alternate historical theories pointing to men like Earl Van Best Jr. and Lawrence Kane. Honestly, the theories are endlessly varied. Was he a disgruntled veteran utilizing military ciphers, a fame-seeking journalist? Or, as some people actually suggest, could the murders and the letters be the coordinated work of multiple people? We are neutrally presenting all of these because, frankly, despite 50 years of digging, hard scientific proof remains totally elusive. The missing puzzle pieces just never perfectly aligned for any single individual.
Which brings us to our final question today. Will the Zodiac ever truly be unmasked? Over 55 years later, the case remains officially open. It's a real testament to the enduring power of a genuine mystery.
His letters and his ciphers continue to fascinate true crime enthusiasts and cryptographers worldwide. We just have to wonder, right? With the rapid, incredible advancements in genetic genealogy, the exact same technology that finally caught the Golden State Killer, or maybe with the aid of AI and future code breakers working on those final 2 ciphers, could we finally get an answer? Did he die long ago, taking his secrets to the grave? Or is there a definitive, tiny clue still waiting to be discovered in some dusty evidence locker? I really hope this explainer has given you a clear, structured understanding of the facts surrounding this legendary case. So what do you think? Look at the evidence we've covered today. Will this puzzle ever be truly solved? Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive. And remember, always keep questioning the evidence.